My name is Julie Gishuru. I describe myself as a passionate Pan-Africanist. I'm the president and CEO of the Africa Leadership and Dialogue Institute, and a very big thank you to the African Development Bank and UNHCR for bringing us together this morning to focus on private sector investment opportunities in forced displacement settings. Now, Africa is home to 45 million forcibly displaced people. About 35 million of those are internally displaced. Now, conflict is the primary cause, but increasingly we're seeing climate change playing a role. They say sometimes opportunities are packaged in challenging situations. And for Africa, what is clear is that there's not just significant risk in not addressing the needs, but there's massive opportunity for private sector to engage and leverage benefit in engaging. A very big thank you for being here with us. To set context, just before we go into our conversations, let's have a little video. Thank you so much.
When the private sector comes into play, they are coming from a business standpoint. They see the refugees and the forcibly displaced people as a market.
Currently, there are about 45 million forcibly displaced people in Africa, including 8.8 million refugees that have crossed international border and over 34 million internally displaced persons.
These crises are unfortunately too frequent now, and the humanitarian response can find its limit very quickly if it is not accompanied with development assistance.
Areas hosting refugees and IDPs provide tremendous and untapped business opportunity. Kakuma refugee camp, for instance, and the surrounding Kakuma town represents a market opportunity of over $56 million.
This is the first mini-grid that Renuvia has built in a forced displacement area. Our customer base is primarily refugees. They're an extremely entrepreneurial group of people.
Maize, cassava, beans and other crops, they are grown here, but rice is more profitable among others.
Now it's very critical to see refugee and IDP hosting areas from a different perspective, because refugees, IDPs, host communities also are engaged in business activities.
Je suis chirurgien des poissons. Ça, j'adore ça. Parce que les poissons m'ont fait sortir de la pauvreté, disons.
For Equity Group, we chose to incorporate refugees into our banking activities, provide them savings, provide them payments, provide them loans, and enhance their capacity through financial training.
Once you support the refugees themselves, there is what we call a multiplier effect in the economies where they live. The business case sort of builds itself. It is interesting to note that our branches in refugee locations are doing very, very well.
We work with micro and small businesses for a period of 6 to 8 months. Of the last 11 years we've worked with refugees, we are seeing good repayment rates. And I'm emphasizing good, over 80% borrowers that we have in the refugee communities are able to pay back.
On the continent, our greatest asset is not our natural resources. Even though we're the most endowed region in the world, our greatest resource is our human capital, it's our people. It's a missed opportunity if we do not leverage all our populations across the board.
What a powerful way to end that video. Our greatest resource is our human capital. And with that, I want to welcome our co-hosts to come up and take the stage, take seats up here with me. A warm welcome to Hasatou Nsele, who is the Vice President of Finance at the African Development Bank. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. And Raouf Mazou, who is the Assistant High Commissioner for Operations, UNHCR. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for being with us on this crucial issue. Hasatou, let me start with you. And the approach of the African Development Bank and experience that you are garnering in this space when it comes to working with in situations where forcible displacement has happened. What are you learning, and what can you share, especially with private sector actors? Why should they come in?
Why should they come in? You've seen it from the video. The African Development Bank has what we call the Transition Support Facility. And through this facility, we've been helping address the root causes of fragility. But there is also a part of that facility that looks at funding, financing, hosting communities, the communities that host the refugees, but also the refugees themselves, because they are part of the economic material of the country. But more importantly, through our private sector operations, we've been able to reach towards the internationally displaced community through financial inclusions projects, through human capital projects and others as well. So, for the African, some people might ask, why an international financial institution, an MDB such as the African Development Bank, why fragility? Why peace and security? It is important because, yes, forced displacement is a humanitarian issue, but it's also a development challenge. So it is very important to be able to combine, or it's important to create synergies between humanitarian aid or development, peace, and international development. The type of funding that we see for, I'm not sure that I'm speaking next to the mic, is it better like this? Yes. So the type of funding that we usually see for humanitarian crisis is short-term. But the crises themselves are not short-term. We need to combine short-term funding, but also with long-term development finance, because we need to have sustainable development provided in our countries.
Thank you for that. And the bank works on innovative models that make a change. Is there anything you want to share with us in more detail that we should be aware of?
Absolutely. So we have launched, or we're working on an initiative which is called the Security Indexed Investment Bond Initiative. And the purpose are to build human and non-military institutional capacity in countries in order to assure security and mitigate fragility. But it's also to build investment, or to rebuild infrastructure investment in countries that have been affected by security and conflicts, to invest in social capital and social development in those areas as well, and also to protect zones that have been affected by conflicts, to protect the strategic economic assets of the countries. So, there is one thing that we need to recognize, is that peace and security funding is fragmented. Mm-hmm. It is fragmented. So we did not want to create yet another vehicle that would add to that. So in designing the vehicle, we spoke with the African Union. We spoke with the regional economic communities, because we wanted this as well to be some kind of a bridge to unify and have much more impact as a group, as one, rather than those various pieces across the ecosystem. But most importantly, today, when you receive $1 of funding for peace, humanitarian, it's $1 out. And the vehicle, the peace and security investment vehicle that we are proposing, is different. It's going to, first and foremost, it will receive contributions from African countries, because it has to be Africa-led. We cannot continue to go to donors without putting money on the table. So that's principle number one. Number two, we're going to receive contributions from African countries, from contributors, from donors, which is going to be seed capital for a vehicle that is going to be rated and that is going to go to capital markets to leverage those resources. So that $1 in is a multiple out. And there is a very clear recognition as well that we need to have a governance committee, and that governance is going to be from strategic political leaders, African Union recs, but also the donors. And we need also to have agility and flexibility. It cannot be an admin burden to address an immediate issue. So there's going to be multidisciplinary expertise as well for the financing, the deployment of the assets, but also on the at all levels. So it's quite exciting, and looking forward to the various conversations that we're going to have across the board.
Thank you. It is very exciting, and it sounds like a game changer. And can I just say, Raouf, as I come to you, it's been remarkable to see the role African Development Bank has been playing to stand alongside key actors like UNHCR 2 weeks ago in Nairobi, convening the East African Community, IGAD member states, and actually working on recommendations that were endorsed by government, that are on everything from infrastructure development to skills development, et cetera, remarkable. And so we see the change happening. Last week, of course, Raouf, we were in Lagos, looking at private sector investment in displaced persons on the continent in those settings. Raouf, you've been on this journey for a long time. And of course, the world is facing a very, very difficult period right now. What have you learned about lasting transformation? And what does the private sector need to know as they step into, or as you encourage them to step into this space?
No, thank you very much, Julian, and thank you very much, Asato and the African Development Bank for having invited us to take part in this event, and as you said, Julian, as we also saw from the little film that was shown, we see a drastic increase in number of people who are displaced. That's a fact, and what we are also seeing is that the systems that have been in place so far to respond to this crisis are overstretched. Or I would say not really adapted to the context and what the situation is. Humanitarian response, camps, people living for a long period of time, 20 years, 30 years, with virtually no future, no hope. What we are realizing is that this is a problem for the continent. So everything that we've heard, what Afsatu has described in terms of involvement of the private sector, is the way forward. And what we are seeing is that there is a greater understanding today of the fact that it's not because you find yourself in a situation of displacement that you stop being somebody who can contribute to the economy of the country or of the region which has welcomed you. In the past, there was this idea that if you're displaced, your life will be in limbo for some time and then you will go back to wherever you came from. There is a realization that, of course, it is lasting longer, and there is also a realization that from day one, when you are displaced, if you're provided with the right support, with the right framework, with the right policies, you can immediately fend for yourself, you can immediately be back on your feet. So that's what we've learned, that's what we know. The role that the African Development Bank is playing in that is absolutely crucial. And now bringing more and more systematically private sector actors will help us respond. So of course, there are challenges, and we are working very closely with our colleagues from the IFC, and Sheikh Umar is here, he will be on the panel. How do you deal with the challenges? How do you de-risk an investment so that investment actors are willing to come in a displacement context, in an area where you have a large number of refugees or internally displaced? How do you encourage them to come? How do you help them better understand the context? How do you provide specific products that are adapted to this type of environment? So these challenges are also being better understood, dealt with through the partnerships that we're having. And lastly, we also see more and more businesses that are willing to come to this context Last week, you and I were in Lagos. We saw TGI in the area of agriculture being very present, northern part of Nigeria, where you have a large number of internally displaced persons. In a country like Kenya, you have Equity Bank present in this kind of context, offering financial services. Safaricom, ensuring that access to communication is better provided. We will see Renovia a bit later talking about what is being done in relation to solar. So more companies are coming, more businesses understand the importance of coming forward.
Thank you, thank you. I want us to give a round of applause to Raouf and Hassatu and ask them please to take their seats on the floor. And I'm going to welcome our panel up now to come and take their seats. And Hassatu and Raouf, I'll come back to you before the end, so we'll hear from you again. Can I welcome Douglas Cox, Director of Africa Project Development at Renuvia, Jonathan Bellish, Executive Director, One Earth Future, Rokaya El Houda, Principal at Cross Boundary Group, Sheikh Omar Sila, Regional Director of North and Horn of Africa for IFC, and Dagmawit Bekele. We are so happy to have the Director of the Peace Fund Secretariat of the AU with us as well. A warm round of applause. Thank you all so very much for being here. I'm going to start with a business perspective. And so, Douglas, let me come to you. And we were together in Nairobi a few weeks ago. You shared with us, and I think share with this room as well. Let's take a look at why you've been doing this for a while in these contexts. Why you decided to take the risk, and what return on investment have you seen as a result of going into these spaces? Talk us through that.
Aha. I'm going to do this. Does this look too funny? I think it's better. Yeah, so like she said, my name's Douglas. I work with Renuvia Energy. We're a solar mini-grid company based in the US, but active in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria, with expansion later this year, or I should say next year, to DRC. And being a solar mini-grid company, what that means is we go places where the national utilities of these countries just simply won't reach and provide electricity for at least forever, or at least a few decades, some long enough horizon that we can build the power plants, the power lines, and then the connections to homes and businesses and make a return that makes sense, right? And so our work in Kakuma refugee camp started in 2019. I do need to give some love to GIZ for sort of prompting that and sort of showing us the opportunity in that. But it quickly revealed itself because when we electrify a community with, say, 200 homes, we build a pretty small solar system. It's a lot of upfront capital. It's a really long return. It's kind of a tough investment. But when we look at Kakuma refugee camp, 300,000 people, been there since 1992. It's just such a stable, active, dynamic community with so much activity going on and so many needs for electricity that for us, it's just a no-brainer. It just makes sense. We should be investing there. So we started with only 500 connections in 2019, and then a few years later expanded to 3,000 connections. And later this year we'll be, sorry, again, I keep saying it, but it's December, I should stop. Later next year, we'll be expanding to 19,000 connections. So that's about 1/3 of the camp, which honestly is very cool and a very large number of people, about 100,000 people using our electricity. But also a kind of uncomfortable situation in that powering 1/3 of a refugee camp is honestly, it's too much, right? You kind of need to go all the way. You can't just stop at 1/3 just from an equity perspective and treating everybody the same. And so to kind of treat this as our own little boardroom, if we will, we are raising $44 million in blended finance to continue that expansion to cover all of Kakuma refugee camp and also to cover Dadaab refugee camp on the other side of Kenya. Another situation with even more people also there since the early 90s and honestly, an even more economically dynamic area. So all of this is just, it's just an incredible opportunity. And I think people are slowly coming to realize that refugee camps being the largest communities in the region are, they're no joke. It's not just a humanitarian situation. It's actually a really cool way to provide impact while also bringing investment.
Fantastic. It's good, and it's good business too at the same time. And of course, things like that open the door to so much more, because once you provide electricity, it transforms already, you know, the situation on the ground in so many ways. And Jonathan, let me come to you next. For the past 12 years or so, One Earth has been pioneering investments into Somalia through I think it's called the Shurako program. Talk us through that and your expansion now. What have you learned? What have you experienced? And what gives you the boldness to go forward and expand?
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so it's been quite the journey over the past 12 years working in Somalia. When we started, it was very much considered a country that was only in need of humanitarian assistance. That's how the international community thought of it. That was the primary means of external engagement. But we see around the world, throughout all developing countries and middle-income countries, SMEs represent 60% of GDP, 80% of capital flows, and 90% of jobs. And yet at the same time, the SME financing gap on the African continent is $960 billion. So when I go back to the opening plenary session of the AIF, you know, we were talking about by 2050, 1 in 4 people in the world are going to be African. You know, the population of the continent is going to be 2.4 billion people. The difference between that being a dream and a nightmare is going to be the health of the SME sector. So we've really seen the importance of that work, and we truly believe that private sector development and SME support shouldn't be a reward that you get for improving the country, but a means of doing so. One thing that's been important for us is matching the structure of the financing that we provide with the risk profile. So we provide fully collateralized senior debt through a private credit fund. This allows us to break down the larger tickets that DFIs and MFIs tend to provide into ticket sizes that the local markets can absorb. And it also puts both the risk and the benefits of success onto the entrepreneur, really allowing them to be the engines of development and prosperity in their country. The other thing that we found in Somalia, and that I think is true in a lot of these contexts, is that they tend to be data poor and have institutions that are still developing. So what we found to be really crucial was relying on social networks and human beings to fill that gap, allowing us to conduct effective due diligence in the absence of a credit bureau and that type of data, and to create a strong social incentive to repay and avoid relying too heavily on judicial institutions. We've also found the importance of technical assistance. We support companies that have dominant market positions, have been doing what they do for a long time, know their customers know them, and yet because there's such a lack of formal financing, even these relatively large businesses are still somewhat informal when it comes to business plans, financial projections, and that type of what I call the PowerPoint presentation side of business. So having some concessional resources coming in to help with that formality on the front end really allows us to understand the companies in ways that if we just had an arm's length transaction with them, we wouldn't be able to. This is something that we hear a lot, but I think in situations of forced displacement, it's particularly important, is the coordination between financial institutions and then humanitarian and development actors. A lot of opportunities for SMEs kind of comes as a result of humanitarian activity, and then just understanding, which public-private partnerships need to be unlocked, what are the barriers to growth, really requires a kind of an ongoing dialogue between financial institutions and the more development-focused actors. The last thing I'll say, and the thing that really gives me hope about our future plans to scale both within Somalia and throughout the Horn of Africa, is really relying on the resilience of these entrepreneurs. These are people who have, for years or decades, navigated the complexities, the shocks, and the crises that do come in the Horn of Africa and in other similar regions. And as I always say, I could never run a business in Somalia. So I'm grateful that our entrepreneurs are so good at it, and we really rely on them and trust them to deliver results.
Thank you for that. It's worth restating that the resilience of these people, the strength, the courage, the fortitude, and that alone is such a powerful thing for anybody who wants to invest anywhere. It's such a powerful case. Let me come to you next, Rukaya, and the work of cross-boundary. And you are advising and assisting investors, fund managers, companies, donors, etc., to explore ways to mobilize capital to go into these spaces. Talk us through what you're learning and the business models that you've seen that are working, particularly around blended capital, etc.
Good morning, everyone, and congrats again for waking up this early for this discussion. First of all, I want to acknowledge the excitement about the momentum around private sector involvement in this area. And what's exciting is the form of this engagement that is different from the traditional ways that were centered around either philanthropy or participation in humanitarian agencies, supply chains, or more recently, CSRs. What's also exciting is, just like what we saw in the introduction video, it is an area where data is very hard to get. And so some of the emerging data points, like the size of the market opportunity for Kakuma refugee camp and others, they contribute to attract the attention of investors and channel that attention into the area. So overall, I think the momentum that we've seen is very exciting. Now, in terms of what we see, first need to acknowledge that the regulatory context is a challenge, and it's also different across different countries. Like in northern Kenya, refugees are not allowed to gain formal employment, move, or own property. In Uganda, it is very different. And so we see that the business models developed by companies differ based on the differences in these contexts. That being said, what's interesting to note is that unless your business intrinsically forces you to engage differently with refugees or internally displaced populations compared to host communities, actually many of the deals we worked with, companies are not able to tell which share of their customers are from a forcibly displaced population group. If you think of, to give one example, Keep It Cool, they provide called supply chain services, and they're not able to tell you, and it's perhaps a good thing, and so there's this range of businesses that target communities where there is a high rate of refugees and internally displaced people, but provide services that cover the needs of both the hosts and the IDPs. Another dimension is, I think, as much as many investors would love to invest in businesses that are owned by forcibly displaced people, most of the businesses that we see tend to not be run by refugees or IDPs, but provide services and job creation opportunities to this group of people. The last thing that we see is the need for partnership, and I think you both mentioned it earlier. We see that these companies focus a lot on building partnerships with humanitarian agencies, with local communities, like tapping into the network of trust that exists, because that is really essential to providing the goods and services that are there, that are needed. So now talking about how to mobilize capital into this field. I know we're at AIF and there's an appetite for big deals, but the reality is that those big flagship deals do not exist. Instead, what you have is a variety of deals, a range of ticket sizes, And these tickets often are not one check. Most of these deals are faced. And based on that, I think there is a need to have a portfolio approach where you bundle different deals into pools that can be presented to investors to mobilize money. And there are some interesting initiatives. There's the KKCF, the Kakuma Kalu Bay Challenge Fund. There's the US Africa Trade Initiative. For example, in this one, we have identified 9 companies with a total investment pool of about $420 million, and that is more compatible with the type of investment that you can mobilize. It's particularly compatible because these investors usually are not sector-specific. Usually the biggest driver is the job creation, so that gives you the flexibility to bundle these deals together when you are mobilizing capital for that. In the same spirit of pooling and building more of a portfolio approach, I think in the context of blended finance, there are several tools, but I think investment facilitation plays a particular role. I think it allows not only to pool opportunities to give them higher visibility, but it also allows you to share the cost of early origination of deals and hence bring more deals that are better packaged and structured to investors. 2 last points on what we have learned, I think, in capital mobilization. Number 1, there is a need for communication and coordination among investors so that the tools and the funding that is proposed is actually complementary. For example, there is a need to agree among players on a minimum level of concessionality so that you don't create discrepancies among the funding options. And the last part is the need for pioneering transactions. I think these play a crucial role, and these are not necessarily big transactions. Their value comes from their demonstration effect, from their ability to address perceived risk and to contribute to spillover of knowledge spillover effects that attract more, crowds in more investment and more entrepreneurship in those areas.
Thank you so much. I love the practical approach. It makes so much sense, and I think there's such mitigation in risk just by going, that way. And thank you for the work that Cross Boundary is doing in this space. Dagmawit, I want to come to you last because I think there's a powerful message you need to land for all of us, and I'm looking forward to hearing that. But Sheikh Omar, let me come to you with the IFC's work in this space, and for quite a while, the IFC has been exploring, these contexts. I recall many years ago a release of a report around Kakuma and the idea of the private sector engaging at a time when in Kenya that was often unheard of. So I want to congratulate the IFC for that and just share with us on this journey, what are you learning and what lessons do you have and message do you have for private sector?
Thank you, and good morning to all. I first would like, to thank the African Development Bank and the AIF for. I'm going to do like you, like a rock star. Really thanks the AIF and the African Development Bank, for this panel. But I really want, to commend, the UNHCR, because if you are here today, it is because of them. Because they set, I would say the stabilization and the ecosystem to bring the minimum dignity to the people who are suffering, and in some cases are still suffering. So really, Raouf, I really want to thank you personally and your organization for really this important work that you are doing. And why for us IFC, people may be surprised, that and I was discussing with some people just before the coffee. They say, "Why, guys, you always look for big tickets?" I say, things change. And as you rightly say, we have been engaged for years. First of all, is really our corporate, commitment and our engagement to see how the private sector, can contribute, to reduce or mitigate the most, development, challenges. Refugees is one part, climate, gender, and all these topics are critical, and it's really part of our agenda. I would say a lot has been said. Is it easy? No. Why? First of all, when you face this example, and maybe Kakuma is kind of really is a flagship, but is also kind of exception when you have a number of people, and again, having people displaced for 20 or 25 years, 30 years, is not a good signal. But do they have overweight place to go? No. So you need to tackle, and create effectively and renewable the ecosystem, the right, and I would say this market, when you have people who can be employers, who can be employees, who have skills, and Kakuma is a fantastic example that most probably can be replicated. Why I say it's not easy? The first thing to really address is the ecosystem. And then when I say the ecosystem, is not in all the countries that you can openly with the authorities address the issue of forced displaced refugees. So, and this is one part where IFC with his partner is engaged strongly on this advocacy. When you have done that, you have, I would say, also to face, the reality, how you can engage on a sustainable manner. And for us, the only way that you can do that is to look at the ecosystem at the local level. So you need to engage, with the local government. You need to engage with the local communities, because if you come and support only, this side, the people will say, but our people also are suffering. Why you don't look at everything? So we as IFC really change, the way we are seeing things. We look at local development and really try, to encourage, the business. And even at the business level, some business even don't know if you have the right, to hire. I would say for the displaced, forcibly displaced people. So there is, I would say, the perception that we need, to work. And what we specifically are doing, again, through we set, 5 years, strategic partnership with UNHCR. Of course, it's not only Africa. We work in Eastern Europe, we work in Latin America, but there is a clear strategic direction to see how the private sector, can be engaged. Then after that, in our action is work on the regulatory side, because without that, it cannot work. Try as much as we can, to play the advocacy. I can tell you, when we receive now, I would say, an investment proposal, of course, all the cross-cutting aspect, the gender, the climate, all this is basic today for us. But we add another layer. Is there a way that you can have, the refugees in your project? Then after that, what we are also doing now, and we have some recent example on the financial sector, where we allocate a dedicated line of finance to a bank. But on this line of finance, we say that X% of the financing should go and finance, SMEs owned by displaced people. So there is a kind of action, and when it's possible, as well with the donor contribution, we put a kind of performance-based grant. But if they achieve a certain level of, I would say, rate of engaging this, then they will get a level of grant inside of our thing. So for us, is not a box that we just want to tick. It's really part of our strategy, and there is many examples. I think as of today, we are actively engaged in 15 separate, projects. Will be maybe another forum able, to share the lesson learned of that. But it is an engagement that we want to contribute. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you for walking us through that. Thank you for the approach you've taken, the partnership with key actors. like the UNHCR, which has really led in this space, and they're incentivizing, of actors to lean in to doing this. It brings me, Dagmawit, to you, and there's this whole conversation around risk mitigation, and what is risk. And last week in Lagos, a businessman called Farouk Gamal, private sector organizations called TGI, I believe, said actually the risk for Africa is not doing something about this. That is the true risk. And so when you look at the role of private sector from an African Union lens of peace and security, what responsibility does private sector have to play a role in being an actor to maintain peace on the continent?
Thank you very much, moderator. And first of all, I would like to thank the African Development Bank for giving us the opportunity to participate in such a platform, because we believe that we cannot do anything without the engagement of the private sector. So before going or addressing your concern, let me start to provide a little bit of update on what the AU Peace Fund is and how we're doing this activity at the African Union. So the AU Peace Fund was revitalized in 2018. And of course, it was existent since 1993. But in 2018, as part and parcel of the reform process that we are going through at the African Union, our heads of states decided to have finance, which is going to support peace-related initiatives that we carry out within the continent. And this finance, they said, should be sustainable, adequate, and predictable financing. And they decided to have an initial endowment of 400 million, which is going to be contributed by the member states themselves. But starting from 1993 until 2018, even if Peace Fund was existent, it was only possible to mobilize 25 million. But after our heads of states made their decision, as of now, we have a balance of 390 million, to be exact, as of October 31st, 2024. But at the same time, we managed to disburse nearly 19 million over 2 years, which makes the whole resource mobilized under this umbrella of Peace Fund to be 419 million. And this is a clear indication of the commitment of our heads of states, our member states, for sustainable peace in our continent. And ultimately, the major purpose of the AU Peace Fund is not for peace support operations. It is for conflict prevention. And we believe that there is a lot that we can do to be able to avoid conflict from happening in the first place, as it's not going to happen as a surprise. There are a number of indicators here and there that's going to contribute towards these conflicts. So our heads of states, they said that we need to do something about it by having three disbursement windows. Mediation and preventive diplomacy is one of the disbursement window that we have. And the second one is the capacity building for the regional economic communities and regional mechanisms that we have in our continent, the RECs and the REMs. And the third one is for the initial deployment of the PSOs, if we're going to be obliged to address those challenges practically happening on the continent. So with this, we managed to mobilize this 419 million, starting from 2018 and onwards. But in 2024, the Executive Council of Member States at the African Union, they decided that we need to start to reach out to the private sector, as the issue of peace and stability is not the sole responsibility of the government, because the private sector is going to benefit out of the peace and stability that's going to be existent in the continent. And with that, we started to reach out to the private sector that we have in our continent. And in July 2024, there was the first platform that we carried out. And in that platform, the private sector and multilateral financial institutions of our continent, they pledged to provide 216 million for the AU Peace Fund as a commitment which is going to be delivered from 3 to 5 years. So we can see how they are starting to see the benefit of engaging in conflict prevention and in working with us in peace building. And this will lead us to your question on how we see the involvement of the private sector in peace building initiatives. And as we all know, there is a strong nexus between peace and development. So if there is no peace, there is no sustainable development. And as Africa, we have Agenda 2063, where we aspire to see prosperous and integrated Africa. And that's going to happen with the existence of sustainable peace, which is going to result in sustainable development. So we cannot think of having development without peace, and we cannot think of having peace without sustainable development. So that's why we are engaging the private sector to come and work with us, and they have seen the advantage. And of course, for any business to thrive, there has to be peace. And we have private sector investors in this room that are really benefiting out of the peace and stability of our continent. And it has to come with the collaborative work that we're going to do, because it's not going to happen if we're not going to work on that. And with that, we call upon the private sector to start to partner with us. And definitely, we're looking forward to engage more private sectors that are existent in our continent. And the commitment that we managed to secure, the 216 million, we believe that is just the beginning. There is ample opportunity within our continent that's going to help us to address our own challenge when it comes to peace-related challenge. Thank you.
So much. I wanted to come to the floor. Thank you. Very, very clear. And I think, this is not the AU's role. It's not just member states' roles. What's clear is we all have a role to play to ensure there's peace and security on the continent. And the shocking numbers, I think it's from 2016, there's also almost a doubling of numbers of displaced persons on the continent, tells us that it's more urgent than ever. I want to take 2 to 3 questions just because of time. And so, thank you, sir. Introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Zach Abdi. I've come all the way from Canada. I'm very excited to be a part of the engagement in terms of how we can help in terms of sustainable solution. What I was very happy to hear some of those words that I heard today about social capital and sustainability and sustainable solution. And at the same time, I also heard people, a gentleman there who mentioned about the refugee camps since 1992. People are still there. So you're talking about 2 generations, 20 years to make 1 generation, so that's 40 years almost. So 2 generations of people still there. What can we do in order to address the issues which is related to food security and food supply chain? Instead of people waiting for the food to come to them, why can we not increase or develop their own farming, their own community farming? So that way you can reduce your food waste solutions or food. You don't have to wait for people to give you food. You can make your own food. And at the same time, you're also addressing many of those things that it can address the climate change as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I will come to you in a moment with it. It's actually, sir, 3 generations now. Yeah, 3 generations, which is just shocking. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Aaron. Thank you so much for the great presentations. I've also, alongside Douglas, worked on rural electrification and infrastructure work for about a decade, including with UNHCR, to help initially understand how to get infrastructure type money into refugee camps. And I'm just curious from the panel here, we have a lot of big money being discussed and big numbers. But at the end of the day, it's all about risk. It's like, can you get your money back? And on the one hand, we're trying to find opportunity in these challenging situations. But on the other hand, you know, if Douglas's company is developing a mini-grid, that means we need to expect that there's going to be people there for 20 years, right? And so there's a complex interplay between those two dynamics. And so I'm curious if the investors on the stage see that there are enough instruments, de-risking instruments, guarantees, et cetera, out there for you to enable you to put hundreds of millions more into camps other than in Kenya. In Uganda, there's enormous camps. In Mozambique and Zimbabwe, there are enormous camps. The risks are much higher in those markets than they are in Kenya. And so I'm curious if you see the ability for your money to go into these more challenging displaced people's settlements. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a clarification, in Uganda, very many refugees, but not in camps. I believe, yes, yeah. No question from a lady. Sorry, I'm coming back to you, but first I have to find a lady who has a question or a comment or a contribution. Yes, no? Yes, thank you very much.
My name is Nena Nwabufo. I'm the Vice President for Regional Operations and Transition Support at the African Development Bank. I think the issue is not whether we close camps. The issue is how we transform them from being camps and being part of society. We also need to realize that because somebody came as a refugee does not mean they don't have skills that can contribute to economic development. So even those people in camps, those camps can be transformed into thriving cities or villages or part of the economic ecosystem of any country where they are. Sometimes it's not so much as the refugees are not willing or they don't have the means, because a lot of them receive money from diaspora, but it's government policies at times also constrains what the refugees can do or cannot do. So part of what we also need to look at is how we work with the government to transform policies that limit the capability and the capacity of the refugees to thrive. There are some countries that are very good in integrating refugees, and there are those that have, all they have done is just keep them within the boundaries of the camp. And I do recall reading in a newspaper about refugees. I wouldn't mention the country. They can't own mobile phones, SIM cards. They can't open bank accounts. And some of them are in universities in these countries, but they cannot live fully because they're not given the opportunity to even register a SIM card. So somebody has to register in their name. So I think government policies as well will help and facilitate whatever is being done on the private sector side.
Thank you so much for raising that. All excellent points. And just to emphasize the importance of that, you know, some refugees who get scholarships, we've seen girls waiting to get identity in order to go in and accept those scholarships, to the point that they end up getting pregnant and never even go because they're waiting a year, 2 years. But the good news is that African governments are being incredibly responsive now. There's almost a shift on this agenda, and you're starting to see a willingness on policy issues to make significant change, and that makes this an important time for all of us. We can step in. Let me come to you, Sheikh Omar, and the question I saw you wanted to respond on agriculture and the opportunities for people to leverage agriculture in those very areas. Please go ahead.
Yes, I have two concrete examples. The first one maybe in South Sudan, when you have a huge head coming. So we didn't know exactly how to address that. And I went to visit one place in South Sudan, and the minister was telling to me is that maybe it's the only place on the world where the fish died for old age, because you can put your hand on the water and you grab a fish. But then you have a total disruption, you know, of the day. So what we decide to do, we decide to do a focus mapping on the food sector and agri, and we should get the result by the end of this month. to see how we can really intervene on that. The other example that I want to give you is an example on Ethiopia, where we work, with IKEA Foundation, who used to support communities on the farming sector. And now we are developing a kind of AgTech model with putting an aggregator, extending, the land, and IFC coming when a bank land to put a first loss just to scale up. So this is concrete things, but I totally, agree with you. On the power, electricity, access side, we have a joint initiative with the African Development Bank. The M300 is to connect 300 million Africans by 2030. This is working. There is really working. And aside of that, we have decided to put, again, for the last mile and to reach out, to the local, player. The ability, to provide them, some patient, funding, like equity, even for small. So there is a platform of 400 million, which is currently being developed at the level of the World Bank Group. So this is concrete solution, and I do also see that calling, the guarantee platform now, which is with MIGA, can be accelerator to provide, some risk mitigation on that. So there is a concrete example ongoing. Thank you.
So I think these were really great questions and comments. And the question about producing more food locally, I think is a really important one. And it reminded me of a couple of years ago, I was sitting with the head of the Agri-Bank in Bamako in Mali. And I asked him, if I went to the grocery store across the street, how many locally produced food products would I find? And he said 0. And I think a big part of that, and Mali had a thriving onion and potato industry, but in the era of kind of pure free markets, they had to privatize as a result of an IMF condition, and then the large private agribusinesses said, well, we can increase our production in India by 3% and produce the same amount of onions and potatoes. I think the wind is at our back. We're starting to see industrial policy coming back more in vogue, and I think that will help. But I'll also say that both for rural electrification and agriculture, if you look in North America and you look in Europe, these are subsidized industries. So I think that it brings us back to the last comment that we heard from the floor, that ultimately these systemic solutions at scale are going to have to result from the public sector and the private sector working together.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're closing now. I'm going to come to each of you for a 30-second comment to rally the private sector in this space. But just as we do that, allow me to say and to ask all the actors in this room that have the ability, let's re-look at this question of risk. The idea actually for African businesses that it's too risky sometimes to invest in this environments it's almost, it's shocking, because the risk for those of us on the continent is not investing. And therefore, how do we create maybe layers or a deeper understanding of what risk is in this space to encourage and incentivize more investment in this space? This is what we're hearing also from the ground is so important. So let me start. I'll start this way and go right to the end. Sheikh Omar, you'll have the final word. 30 seconds. Please rally private sector stakeholders. Why should they pay attention to this agenda and step in? Douglas.
Well, I'll flip that backwards just because I am the private sector. An investment in us is an investment in every business in the camp, right? Our customers are using our power to sell cold drinks, to study at night, to run bank branches, to run telco towers, to do everything, anything that anyone would do, right? That's the whole definition of power. And so we just welcome the scrutiny, we welcome looking at the risk, we welcome looking at the long-term horizons and all this, but we also say this is working for us and we want to expand and we want to do more. So come and invest in us and therefore invest in entire ecosystems in these camps.
So smart, so smart. Okay, John.
So the thing that I'd like to say is small investments today can make room for much larger investments in the future. One of the things that we've seen about private sector engagement in fragile and conflict-affected settings is that it really does promote peace, not just at the macro level, but also at the interpersonal level. Conflict comes from zero-sum thinking, and there is no more obvious positive-sum relationship than a private sector trade relationship. So these types of investments can really unlock markets that are currently inaccessible and allow the private sector to capture the benefits of the massive growth that we're going to see on the African continent in the next 25 years.
Thank you, thank you. Rukaya?
I think a lot of the risk that we're talking about is perceived risk, and addressing perceived risk requires building that track record of successful transactions. I can mention from a different field the experience of captive generation, the power sector in Africa. There has been that track record that was built over the couple decades to show that private sector off-takers are willing to pay for electricity, and that created a wave of investments and business development in that sector. So I think tackling the perceived risk is very important, and one of the instruments is through guarantees that don't even get to be withdrawn so that you can cover a larger pool of transactions is very important.
Fantastic, such an important point. Thank you so much. Tagmawit?
Thank you very much. Just a very small point. For the private sector to thrive, there has to be sustainable peace. And sustainable peace is going to be guaranteed if we invest in peace. So we're making a call and we're plea to your engagement in partnering with the AU Peace Fund so that we can address the root causes of conflict, such as unemployment, poverty, inequality, and the others, so that we'll be able to mitigate the fragility challenge that we have. So we're calling upon your engagement and partnership with us, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Sheikh Omar.
Thank you. To address your first point on the risk. Okay. I thought it was the translation, so I was a little surprised. No, to address your question about the risk.
I think please hold. It's being recorded, and I'm sure these clips will be used. So
yeah, no.
Please go ahead now.
Address your question about the risk, I think that IFC is a good example. 2 years ago, we invest $11 billion in Africa. Last year, it was 14 billion. We cannot do that if we were not able, to adjust the way we are approaching. So the risk appetite is there. The other thing on the risk appetite, we are doing a significant shift to engage in more patient, capital to develop the private sector. So you will see IFC do more equity, investment. But my take of this session is really how we did in partnership with the African Development on the energy sector, on the agri sector. I would say with the UNHCR, we should again have a huge and scale, initiative around, this topic, and have, some bold target, by 2030. And alone, we cannot achieve nothing. So let's try, to see how we can come together with a very clear, agenda. But I can tell you that we have some appetite to take more risk.
Wonderful. Let's give a warm round of applause to the panel. And you may take your seats. Thank you so very much. Allow me, as we close, to also recognize other actors that have been in this space. Allow me just to mention the MasterCard Foundation, who have enabled our storytelling and policy-focused dialogue, and to say that there are many others who stand alongside. And what we are learning increasingly is that we all need to be at the table to make a change, including displaced persons and refugees as well, those communities and host communities. Hassatu, can I welcome you back up to share with us from the podium, if you don't mind, your final thoughts on next steps and way forward. Thank you so much.
Somebody forgot their phone. No, is it yours? Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, so thank you very much. I mean, this was really a rich, very rich session. The International Financial Architecture for Sustainable Peace and Security
needs to be reformed in order to fully play its role at scale and with impact. And there was a call from the UN Secretary General about the quantum leap that is needed in terms of resourcing for peace and security. Everyone needs to be at the table. If there is no peace, there is no sustainable development. And without the private sector, we will not have the scale that is needed for sustainable development. We need to be bolder, because we cannot be proud, absolutely, we cannot be proud of how this situation with the displaced people, with peace and security, has evolved today. And if we hope to make a lasting impact, we need to reform the way that we work together. It is a chain. It's not competition. It's not about visibility. It is about changing the lives of people, and we have the means to do it, and we have to do it. The SIIB is an initiative that we're launching, but we call it AFDB. It's not AFDB. It's AFDB with the African Union, with the RECs, with the countries, with the donors, with the private sector, with everyone, in order to make a change. If we don't do that, 20, 40, 50 years down the line, our children, grandchildren and what have you, are going to be holding the same conversations.
That a round of applause, please. And they will look at us and ask us, when you had a chance to make a change for the continent, what did you do? Where were you? Rauf, please, your final thoughts on next steps.
No, thank you very much, Julie, and thanks to everybody, to all those who spoke today. I think we're clearly at a point of a transformative moment. I mean, what we've heard from those who were on the panel, whether it was the African Development Bank, whether it was the IFC, whether it was Renua, whether it was AU, I mean, everybody understands that we need to approach forced displacement in a completely different way. And what we also hear from the private sector is that willingness to play that role. We need more of these conversations. We've had, as Julie said earlier, last week, a conversation on internally displacement person and private sector in Lagos. This conversation today, we need to also connect the issue of forced displacement with other issues, peace, of course, but environment and all the others. The business case, I think, listening to everybody, is made. So there is no issue of, does it make sense to make sure that refugees and IDPs are part of the economy of the country or the communities that are welcoming them? I think it's clear. The issue now is, how do we make it? And what we heard also from the private sector partners, that it is possible and we know how to do it. The issue of government's role, and it was also, the point was also made by Nene earlier, the role of governments in creating the environment for refugees and IDPs to be part of the economy is clear. But what you also said, Julie, is that we see more and more governments willing to create the environment that allows people who find themselves in situation of forced displacement to be fully part of the economy. So it's win-win. I think from everybody, it's win-win for the refugees and host communities. It is win-win for companies, and we've heard, which can tap a market, thriving market that is there, that exists. And it's also a win-win for the communities which are hosting refugees and internally displaced persons. And probably that's my last point. In a world where the issues of asylum, should I help the person who is fleeing danger, who is fleeing a war? Should I help that person? That question is being asked in some countries. On the African continent, you have communities that have been receiving and welcoming people who are fleeing conflicts for decades. They continue to do that. What we can do now is to give back to a certain extent and help these communities, who are often communities at the borders and communities which have not been priorities for their governments. We can now help these communities also thrive and them be fully part of the economy of their own country. So again, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to the African Development Bank, and we hope that we'll have more of these events in the future.
Thank you so much, Raouf, AFDB, and all the other partners that have been walking this journey. Let me bring the refugee voice into the room just before we close. We're hearing from them, we don't want handouts. We are capable. We want to contribute. They want dignity. And we must give them that. So even centering their voices and their views is critical. Let me say that I carry with me the responsibility, having had a media background, to bring the media in a way that changes the perceptions that we've been talking about. And so we will do that. I'll close with an African proverb because I love them. And there's one that tells us, teeth chew together. So if you're one tooth, not really gonna do much, right? 2, 3, okay, you might chew a bit. But this is a tough one. And we've all got to be in that room chewing to make it work. And we will, and we must make it work. Today, Africans, some of them are dying literally to leave the continent. So many on the continent displaced. It's time we gave all Africans a space of dignity on this continent so they don't have to leave. And where they are, they find their own purpose and they contribute. Thank you so much for being with us. We will succeed. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you very much.